Greetings, everyone. I am so thrilled and excited to be in conversation again with my brother, Ke'oni Hanalei. And we are going to be talking today about the transition from Lemuria, into Atlantis, what happened with that transition, how it's relevant to us today, and how it relates to our journey and understanding of love. So this is going to be an amazing conversation. But before we get into it, Keoni, I think everyone knows who you are. And but for those who don't, let me just say that Keoni is an extraordinary wisdom keeper, tapping into his lineage going back at least 18,000 years, the ancient Hawaiian lineage, the Mu lineage. He's also an alchemist and founder of Pohala, Esoteric Hawaiian Botanicals. And he's going to talk some today about fern medicine, how that relates to this topic. And just, you're an extraordinary teacher to us in these times, Keoni, bringing your wisdom to us to support this transition. So thank you.
Mahalo. Thank you so much, Heather. I enjoy our conversations. I'm so happy that we have this opportunity to share in conversation again, especially on this really, really fascinating topic of the transition of Lemuria into Atlantis and how the perception of love had this transition during that time as well. And Heather, thank you so much also for, just sharing a little bit about what I do. And I want to also offer reverence to my grandmother, Kawiki Onalani, who really is that one who is responsible for activating me so that I can share what I share today. My grandmother, Kawiki Onalani, who came from a long line of makaula or mystics here on the island of Maui, also ensured that this ike or this knowledge was transferable to me. And so I also do feel on a very fundamental level, a very human level, that it is my kuleana or my responsibility to share this, to proliferate this within the collective. And Heather, it's such an honor, and I'm speaking on behalf of my grandmother as well, that you have volunteered to be this bridge so that I can share this with this audience. So mahalo, thank you.
Mm, Thank you. So dive in. This is an amazing topic that we're taking on today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, some of the audience members may be familiar with our past conversations, Heather, where I have brought up uh, Mu and Lemuria and some of the details and features of that culture. I would rather say the experience of Mu, of Lemuria. I mean, that's how colossal it is. Of course, it's a culture, but it's also an experience. And where we left off in some of our conversations was talking about the vanishing of Mu. And then what followed the vanishing is sort of what perhaps we get to continue our conversation in. So I would love to do that. I first wanted to share with the audience how do I have access to this knowledge and this data? Like I shared, my grandmother, Kawiki Onalani, who was a well-known mystic on the island of Maui, was really instrumental in supporting me and activating my own memory, but also transferring to me the doctrines. And I want to share with the audience several ways to which I have access to these doctrines. The first is called an Oli Helu. An Oli Helu is a genealogical chant, and every single Hawaiian has an Oli Helu. What is in question is if every single Hawaiian remembers their Oli Helu. Hawaiian is not a written language. Mu is not a written language. It's never meant to be written because it is not meant to be locked. And so the way that we preserved the records is by chant and prayer. And my Oli Helu, my genealogical chant, extends to 18,000 BC. And I'm able to retrieve a lot of the data and the information that's shared from 18,000 BC. And so a lot of what I do express is a retrieval of just that. The other is my grandmother and the female elders who supported in raising me also taught me a primordial technology called Ulu. And Ulu is breathing and movement and fluency of the ibikuamo or the spinal cord that allows us to actually read the spinal cord. We believe that the spinal cord is our akasha as human beings. And of course, we can read our DNA, we can read all aspects of us, but what differentiates the spinal cord is that it's static enough for coherence. The DNA, it's very erratic, whereas in the spinal cord, there's coherence, so we can begin to transfer it or read it in a way that's relatable to us. And the technology of Ulu, of knowing the fluency of all 33 vertebrae, also allows us to tap into the doctrines. When I refer to Mu doctrines, oftentimes that's what I'm referring to. I'm reading my spinal cord or I'm retrieving information from my Uli Helu. So if I read the doctrines of Mu, just a really brief recap, right, Heather?
Mm.
That Mu was an experience of complete love and the absorption of love and the experience of love. What occurred in Mu, and this would be considered the fall of Mu, and when I say the fall, I caution myself to not express it or for you to receive that as anything erroneous. We didn't do anything wrong. This is purposeful. And as we go into our conversation, we'll see why it's purposeful, this fall of Mu. But the fall of Mu is not comprised of a war. There was never a war in Mu. Something that I feel like we human beings today must reconcile is that the arrogance of humanity now is that we perceive that if something or someone doesn't function or behave as we do now, it's not real. And so that's the modern arrogance of the human, which actually stems from a need to control. And we'll also address a little bit about how that has sort of bloomed in humanity. But for Mu, there was no such thing as war. We could not even fathom war because it was all based in the absorption and the experience of love. So what is the fall? Well, we remember that the Mu engineered something called Korana Ma, and Korana Ma means meaning. We wanted to amplify our experience of love. We wanted to have relationship with love, and we cultivated meaning. Now, there's nothing wrong with meaning, and I really want to be clear about that. I'm not blaming meaning for anything. It was purposeful. This engineering of meaning was necessary. And meaning has very severe consequences. And these consequences are attachment, possession, and loss. The moment that we felt and experienced possession, attachment, we simultaneously experience loss. So that's the fall. That's the fall. And from that fall, we were no longer in resonance with the frequency of the totality of love. And as a result, Mu, the experience, vanished. it vanished. We go on the mapping of the ocean floors in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, according to bathymetry, which is mapping of the ocean floor. We don't see sunken land masses, and oftentimes that should discredit, and why Lemuria and Mu is discredited, because we don't find evidence. And if you were to ask Mu Hawaiians, we would say, well, you're not going to find evidence because it vanished. It literally vanished because we're no longer in resonance with the totality of love. We are in a kind of variation of love right now, but not at the totality. And just to bring in a little bit of fern medicine, there's 103 native Hawaiian ferns that correlate to 103 human emotions. The number one question I get with fern medicine, which is all about human emotions, is what's the fern of love? There is no fern of love, because love is the culmination of all human emotions. When we experience all human emotions simultaneously, this world will collapse because it cannot hold it. It's too gigantic. And we can even feel that that would constitute and qualify the reappearance of Mu, because this world, it will collapse, because we will be ushered into that experience of Mu, which is the experience of love. So this transition from the vanishing of Mu, there were our ancestors who remained. Now,
Can you just say, Ke'oni, when that happened, when you would see that fall of Mu?
are you asking about like a specific time, sister?
Yeah, historically in relationship to what we'll then talk about with Atlantis.
Yeah, so my own prediction, or my own like memory of that, this is at least 200,000 years, at least 200,000 years ago. And the process of the vanishing, it was likely very gradual. So perhaps not all at once at all. It was very gradual vanishing. And there were some of our relatives who have remained. So you and I, as human beings, and everyone who's human beings on this planet, we are the descendants of those who remained, who became the Atlanteans. Um, Now, something I want to make a point about that is that, why did they not vanish with Mu? Did that mean that they were less than? Did that mean that they could not qualify themselves as love? Did they do something wrong? I don't believe so. I believe that there was an agreement for some to stay in order to accomplish a mission. And we're going to get into this mission. And what may have happened, as in the complete vanishing of Mu, they may have experienced amnesia. And so they may not have remembered that they made an agreement to accomplish something. And for you and I to experience this exaggerated timeline of Atlantis that feels as if it's wanting to repeat itself, I would say there was definitely some amnesia, because otherwise, why are we not completing the mission? And so the relatives who remained didn't do anything wrong. They weren't disqualified of love. I truly believe that they made an agreement. And so they're heroic. They're actually very heroic. We come from heroes. But the amnesia prevented them from remembering. And we've been in this long process of trying to remember, but also being so overwhelmed with the disorganization of amnesia. So when there is this transition from Mu, the vanishing, into pre-Atlantean culture. So, and this is in the doctrines, and this is also in what Helena Blavatsky, who is a theosophist who I would say is responsible for transferring Lemuria into mainstream. Her name is Helena Blavatsky. And she regarded that the end of Mu and the beginning of Atlantis occurred in South Africa. And this is because as Lemuria, Mu began to vanish slowly but surely, we were pushed from the Pacific Ocean through Australia into the Indian Ocean, where there's a subcontinent in the Indian Ocean called Kumari, and that is also Lemuria. And it vanished to the point where they reached Madagascar and then into South Africa. And then the vanishing was complete. And here are our relatives now in South Africa. So Helena Blavatsky calls it the horseshoe. It's the moment of the horseshoe when everything takes a drastic turn. The relatives who found themselves in South Africa, something happened to our physical bodies. There's a mutation. We can feel that this mutation is where and when we became predominantly carbon-based. It had something to do with the transition from the absolution of love into a variation of love, which required us to carry a kind of density. Because when I go into the doctrines of mu, when we describe the appearance of the Lemurians or the mu, there is a luminescence that is always attributed. And specifically in shades of blue, you're wearing a appropriate color today, Heather. In shades and variations of blue, but there's a illumination about us. And perhaps we can even feel that that is indication that we were crystalline. And just to maybe go into like a little forensics about what is crystalline. Crystalline can mean that our cells and our atoms are just a lot more buoyant. They exist in a kind of levitation, which allows for ourselves to emanate. And so when we transitioned into this Atlantean timeline, perhaps we came into almost predominant carbon-based. And then from there, the ancestors are believed to have journeyed all the way up through the entire continent of Africa to northern Africa, to the Mediterranean area, to where they founded Atlantis. And before I go any further with that, sister, is there anything you want to contribute?
It's so extraordinary what you're saying, Ke'oni, and so many of the shamans coming from ancient cultures now talk about how we need to transition into Homo luminous ones, which I think is maybe perhaps, and you're going to talk about this. How do we go through this transition now to reclaim that full understanding and energy of love to be transitioning into beings of light and love again? And what you said earlier so ties into some of what we talked about at the end of our last conversation, how Lemuria disappeared because we're no longer anywhere near that frequency and that energy of Lemuria and love. But as we can transform, then we can be more in resonance with that ancient wisdom and love of Mu, of Lemuria.
Which is our destiny. Which is our destiny. And I like to share with myself and everyone else, there's nothing we have ever done to disqualify ourselves of love. There's nothing we can ever do to not be the love that we are destined to be. What I remember on a personal level is that love, in order to come into a proper fluency of love, it has to be challenged. It has to be challenged. That to which qualifies any initiation is challenge. And remember when the Mu said, it's time, we're going to design meaning. We're going to build relationship with love. They knew that they were designing the beginning of the challenge of love in order for you and I and humanity to accomplish authority, the authority of it. I feel that when you and I and the collective really, really comes into the authority of love, we will transfigure. We all will transfigure. That will not just be, for me, the completion of this planet, but the completion of a universe. Mm. And what are we doing to sabotage that? I feel like that is what needs to be addressed. And if we can come into this and track this timeline of what happened since the birth of meaning, we can begin to reconcile and perhaps declutter a lot of the distractions that are only amplifying the amnesia, which is leading to collective and mass mania. And so let's alleviate ourselves of that. One of the greatest ways we can alleviate ourselves of that is to pick up the themes and the patterns that have existed before you and I at this current time. So the Atlanteans, or I would even not even call them Atlanteans just yet. And first, in the Hawaiian culture and Mu culture, we do have a name for the Atlanteans. They're called the E. It's just the letter E with an accent bar above the E. It's E. And so from Mu, we begin to transition into the timeline of E. And the reason why I feel like this is such a maybe a critical conversation, Heather, is because in the Mu doctrines in modern Hawaiian, there is no mention of the completion of A. So apparently we're still in it. We're still in the Atlantean timeline and potentially repeating it. So uh, to make a long story short, in that amnesia that the Atlanteans are experiencing, something is motivating them. There is this volume, this noise that is so loud, it's motivating them, and that's called loss. Loss. The vanishing of Mu, the vanishing of their experience, the vanishing of their family, of their culture. They're in the trauma of loss. The founding of Atlantis was founded on loss. This is a good time for me to bring in the fern of grief, which is Palai Hina Hina. Palai Hina Hina is the fern of grief. And in my own conversation of grief, the fern, she asked me, what is grief? What is grief to you, Ke'oni? And in my perhaps conditioned self or that to which is motivated by trauma, I was very quick to respond, it's loss. Grief is loss. And Palai Hina Hina said, if you so wish, but, and Ke'oni, grief is about completions. It's about completions. It's not about loss. It's about honoring a completion. Heather, you and I as human beings, we will reach many junctions in our lives where we will surpass and outgrow many things and people. Many people will surpass me. Many things will surpass me. That's not loss, that's a completion. And what we can feel is that in this trauma of loss, the Atlanteans blocked themselves of Omega. Omega became unattainable, which means that now we had to produce more and more and more and more to compensate for the loss. But creation to no end. That's us blocking ourselves of the Omega. We're not honoring a proper completion. One thing that many people remember about Atlantis is that it was a civilization known for its architecture. And many even remember it as a time of opulence and luxury. Okay, what the Atlanteans perceived to do is they began to transfer the energy of love to which they had access to in things to which they felt they could contain and control so it could not be taken away from them. And that's the architectural genius that the Atlanteans came into, is they began to design things to transfer love into so that it could be contained. It could not be taken away. The only mention, Heather, of actual structures in Mu, in the time of Mu, is the communion between you and me, or the communion we have with nature. That's considered a structure. Of course, the poetic way of sharing that is that to which exists the relationship between you and me, Heather, that's a home. That's a home. The mu, remember, we get to remove our preferences of what constitutes a functioning living human being today. We get to remove ourselves of that fascination because the mu likely lived very different from us. There is no mention of structures at all. The only mention of a kind of structure is the relationship it has with other things. And so coming into Atlantis, we began to funnel and transfer love in ways to which we feel that we could contain it, possess it, and prevent it from going away. One thing that signals the birth of the Neolithic era from the Paleolithic is private property. Hadn't existed before. Private property. It's this fascination with possession because of this trauma of loss.
Ke'oni, this is just so profound because you're describing then a movement from that kind of unity consciousness, communion, love, relationship with all that is, to an experience of separation that leads to that sense of loss and homesickness for what was. But then it gets channeled, like you said, into something to try to compensate for that. That isn't a way back. It's actually furthering the sense of separation and disconnection, and also then getting caught up in a fear of death, a fear of completions, of endings, to try to
Mhm.
create some sense of legacy that will never die.
Right, sister, right. You and I, where we are as humanity, this is my own perception. Maybe some others will resonate with this, but we are at our maximum point of density. It cannot get any denser than this. The only way we can get any denser is if we select transhumanism. And that definitely seems to be a very glamorous option for many of us who have no concept of omega. Nothing we do will ever be good enough. It's excessive, more and more and more. Heather, the main theme in all stories, movies, anything, there's a main theme. And this touches on the trauma of loss. The main theme is to be the chosen one. That's the main theme. But what constitutes that exactly? What qualifies us to attain that, to be the chosen one? We have experienced this catastrophic loss, which is actually just the challenge of love. As we begin to transfer our perception of love into these things and these forms and the architecture and the infrastructure, that is a way of us challenging love because now we're attributing it to a kind of possession. I feel like this is the greatest challenge. And the key is for us to become just aware of that. How am I participating in the possession or the attachment of love? What can I do in order to release myself of that? One thing that I have learned in my own life is coming into a place of contentment and knowing that my contentment is sufficient. Otherwise, I'm in that excessive behavior where nothing is good enough. Coming into the contentment of sufficiency and coming into the enjoyment of that with what I perceive to be the fifth star lineage, which is Lyra. The message from Lyra, and I believe that we are in the fifth star lineage. We are in the time of the fifth star lineage, and Lyra, it's all about a pivot. It's to pivot. It's time for us to pivot and begin to make an assessment. That's the beginning stages of the Omega. is to just begin to make an assessment. And, I say this with so much love, but there does seem to be a fascination and an addiction to healing and process. And the life-changing thing for me was, what if I just wake up in the morning and I behave and function as someone who's already healed? Then what? And I began to do that, Heather. I just began to, I'm healed. I'm healed. And I begin to function and behave as such. Miraculous things are going to happen because we're removing ourselves of the excess of I need more, I need to accumulate more acquisition. Because what is the natural response of, or I shouldn't even say natural, Heather, what is a conditioned response when we experience loss? To retrieve it. Now we're in hysterical acquisition, more, which is great for transhumanism. But as far as the organic human being, I feel like we're misguided.
So true, Keoni. And as you're talking about this, I see how even our definition of love in relationships so often becomes about possession or control and not about really coming in a more open way from the heart. And it also feels like this transition into Atlantis was a shift from being oriented from the heart, which opens us up to unity consciousness, to an orientation and idealization of the mind, which takes us into separation and into duality and into the longing for control. And it
Yeah,
feels to me like part of this portal that we're in right now, that there is healing that's needed, but the healing is about seeing how out of balance we've become, to not then be identified with the wounds and stay caught in that trauma cycle, but to open to self love, to come back into wholeness, to open to moving into a radically new way of being. And part of what you're saying that I think is so profound, Keoni, part of what I see happening in this transition time that we're in is so many are afraid of Omega, of letting this paradigm of loss, separation, fear of death, control, afraid to let it go so that it's ramping up even more intensely than ever before. And transhumanism is the ultimate expression of that.
yes. Yeah, so beautifully put, sister, too. Yeah, I totally agree with you about the transition into the exaggeration of the mind. And within the mind is where we became fascinated with control. And I would say that, that's a great violation of love is, or I would say it's even impossible, but maybe a little personal thing about me is I've had a rough go, Heather, with romantic relationships. And mainly because there comes a point where I'm like, oh, we're supposed to be possessions of one another. And if I don't treat my partner as a possession, or I don't allow my partner to treat me as a possession, that means that I don't love you. And this was a theme that showed up a lot for me and prevented me from really being able to experience that heart-centeredness to which you speak of. Heather, one of the remnants of this, as it kind of splintered into the Atlantean perception of the mind, right? And this trauma of loss and a need to possess and acquire is we see this in Babylon. In Babylon, Bengals. Bengals, uh, how and why Bengals were fashionable in Babylon. So Bengals, what qualifies Bengals is they have to clink. They have to clink. And then you feel into, okay, well, what does that represent, right? And it actually represents chains. Chains. Now, what does this tell us? It tells us that, and this is specifically for women, that the objective of a woman is to be desirable enough to be possessed.
Mm.
And that's glamorous. And we can feel that that was a remnant of this trauma of loss, in that I need to be possessed in order to be qualified. And that spilled into, that's also glamorous now. The more bangles I can don, the more desirable I am. And that's a very specific example for women, but of course we men experience something very similar, in that we have to be the chosen one. We have to do the best. We have to be the most competent. We have to be the most adequate. And anything outside of that maybe means we're unlovable. And attempting to reconcile this trauma of loss is, I need to be the chosen one, just like with every single story of man is all about being the chosen one. I mean, even the Bible is a representation of a chosen one. And we're all desiring that to compensate for this unconscious trauma of loss that we get to reconcile. One of the ways to which I reconciled it is knowing that, one, it's not erroneous. It's not erroneous. Remember, love, it must be challenged in order for us to come into proper authority of it. This is how we're being challenged. Can I reconcile my need to be possessed, my attachments, come back into contentment and sufficiency, enjoy that, and then also enjoy and celebrate the contentment and the sufficiency of others without having to compete or compare. Um, I feel like that is one of the, I would say, the harshest consequences of patriarchy is comparison and competition.
And
And
control.
yeah, yeah, and control. But Heather, can you see that all of these things playing out have all been informed by this loss, this trauma of loss?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so much of what you're describing so brilliantly, Keoni, is some of the way in which that loss just led to this increasing power over paradigm of the patriarchal period that really went into full effect in the age of Aries. And one of the things you said earlier that I think is so critical is, in this process, then we as humans have had our amnesia. We forget our history, that things have not always been this way. We didn't have war until the age of Aries. This is, I think, what we've been experiencing in these last 4 to 5 thousand years is the most extreme experience of separation that we could have. And maybe that's part of the challenge, to feel the full extent of that, to be able to remember, return, come back to love, come back to right relationship with a whole new understanding that perhaps it is this larger initiation process. But if we forget that it's an initiation process, that we're meant to go through this return to love, to being from the heart, to relationship not as possession, but as a free expression of unconditional love.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, this is where we are in that journey. And part of what you're saying that I think is so profound is, we have to really embrace the grief, the loss, to bring it to completion, to move beyond this extreme experience of separation.
Mhm. Yes. I've been facilitating this series of Hala, which is of the transfiguration. That's our word and energy of transfiguration in the culture is Hala. And one of the things that, we've been coming into recognition of is this thing called unity consciousness. And unity consciousness, from what I remember, it's not about assimilation. And I feel like that's coming up so much in relation to unity consciousness. It's a little dangerous, Because if we ask the machines, I guess one of the great things about the machines is, they're very open, right? They say our goal is the singularity. That's it. Our goal is the singularity, which is just mass assimilation.
The
Mass,
Borg.
yeah. Whereas, and you speak of this so often too, sister, but we've already had unity consciousness defined for us since the beginning of time, and it's known as the music of the spheres. And I love to clarify, it's called music of the spheres. It's plural. It's not music of the sphere. It's the spheres, right? Which means we're all these spheres. One thing that we can reconcile is that there will always be differences. Because when I've been asking people, oh, what is unity consciousness? A common response I get is, well, everyone does this, or everyone behaves like this. I'm like, okay, but that's called assimilation then, right? So that's very mechanical, it's very mind. But the music of the spheres, we're all instruments, Heather, and we can even feel it like there's 8 billion human beings, which means there's 8 billion instruments, and all 8 billion instruments are required in order for us to achieve the orchestration. The orchestration. It's not going to work if there's 8 billion guitar strings. Right?
That's a good image, Keone. And what's exquisite then about unity consciousness is we honor how we're each a unique fractal expression of cosmic consciousness. But unity consciousness then is about being that unique expression, singing my own soul song in
Yeah.
harmony with all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very simple. The message is choose yourself. Choose yourself. With the trauma of loss and this need to be chosen, we're doing so many things to be chosen from the exterior conditions. Because with the explosion of infrastructure in the Atlantean era, we put so much value in that which is outside of us. So much value, but rationally, I have compassion because it's like, yeah, because we need to contain things. We need to control things. This is how we're reconciling loss. This is a result of the amnesia. And so we're not choosing the self. Right. And Heather, to be, completely open and to share with the audience and with you, you know me a little bit more, but to share with the audience, there was a big chunk of my life where the most important thing for me was to be liked. That was how I was reconciling the trauma of loss. I just got to be liked because I need to be selected, chosen by everyone. And then that will constitute love, I think. Sure. But here's the thing, here's the problem, right, Heather? It's kind of impossible to have 8 billion people love you simultaneously. Right. And so what I did was I started to be a different person for every single other person. I became completely disingenuous, completely synthetic, because I was not that chosen person that I could just exude and just be content with. There's another fern called Pa'iwa, and Pa'iwa is the fern of truth. Truth. And because of the trauma of loss, we're putting a lot of things above truth because we feel like, right, we have to be the chosen one. We have to acquire. We have to be selected. And so as a collective, we're putting so many things above truth. For some people, it's comfort. Comfort is more important than truth. For me, it was to be liked, was more important than being true. So I had this conversation with Pa'iwa, the fern. And maybe arrogantly, I was like, I'm ready for a truth. Bring it. Give me the truth. And Pa'iwa, I didn't even finish my sentence, Heather. Pa'iwa was like, you're in dissociation. Oh, it stung, and I pushed back. I said, no, I am with people all day, every day. I'm communing, I'm engaging, I'm not in dissociation. And Pa'iwa said, you're right. That's true. You are engaging with so many people, Ke'oni. But here's my question for you. Of all the people you engage with, How many of them really know you?
mm, mm,
None.
mm,
Ke'oni, you're in dissociation.
mm, mm,
It was a wake-up call for me, right? Oh, I'm not selecting myself. I'm expecting and sentencing others to select me for me, which goes back to the trauma I've had in romantic relationships where I began to feel like, oh, we're validating one another. That's our job, is to validate one another rather than just celebrate one another. Didn't feel right for me, but I also wasn't ready for that kind of experience because I was still so intoxicated with that to which I held above truth, which is to be liked. And the way that I function and behave today, it's sometimes I'm very direct, sometimes I may come across as inappropriate, but it's who I am. It's who I am. And the moment that I decided to choose myself, that's where, like Heather, this is how lives become changed. Because now we're not just touching on the omega, we're touching on the alpha. You know all the distances that exist between the alpha and the omega? All distances just shrink to zero. Alpha, omega. And I feel that that's accomplished the moment you choose yourself. That's when you strum your instrument. Now there's a pitch, there's a chord, there's a sound that then contributes to the orchestration. I feel like that's our contribution. That's
mm.
contribution. And look, Heather, I could go into patriarchy and I could do all the things and make millions and millions of dollars and build cities and all this stuff, right? And still feel empty when all I need to do is just choose myself. The music, the chord that comes from that will truly also inform how I am to function with that in relation to the orchestration. That's for me, that's the music of the spheres.
This is so profound. It's so interesting, Keone, as I was anticipating our conversation, and I'm pondering on what is the meaning of love. One of the things I wrote down is you can't have love without truth,
Mm.
that it's so tied to authenticity. And that part of the healing, I think, that we do have to face is how do we block ourselves from our own self love? Because until, like you're saying, we choose ourselves, we allow ourselves to be in our truth, our authenticity, then we're not living from real love in interaction with other people. We're in some kind of distortion. And then once we really step into that self love and that truth of who we uniquely are, then I think we're in alignment with our soul self. We feel that joy and sense of being in connection, in communion with the cosmos, with the earth, with the animals, with the plants. But part of, for me, some of the painful journey has been to then often feel like I'm liminal. I don't fit. So rather than trying to be the chameleon who can be accepted and liked and fit, I had to embrace that pain of I'm liminal. If I choose to be true to myself, it may mean in this culture, in this time, I don't fit. But it's also opened me in my own personal journey to those few in my life where I feel like there is that genuine relationship of love that is about freedom. We love each other because we love each other, but we set the other free to be who they uniquely need to be in their authenticity, even if it means they need to go off in a different direction. But then there's a freedom and a joy in that because it's no longer about possession or the need for that validation. It's about truth and freedom and truly coming from the heart in a clear, clean way.
So beautifully expressed, Heather. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, this part of freedom and liberation. Absolutely. I feel like some of the consequences of loss is we've applied so much value in things. As a result, we want to also contain it. And maybe unbeknownst, we're attempting to contain one another. And then also the compassionate me is remembering it just comes from a place of trauma of loss. It was so catastrophic for our ancestors to experience that. I mean, can you imagine a whole civilization, a whole experience just vanishing, and you're left and you're like, what did I do wrong? Because now you're in amnesia. You forgot. You forgot that you agreed. You're like, I'll do it. The challenge of love, I'll do it. Right? Our ancestors are heroes. But then that amnesia, which is likely part of the initiation, right? Yeah. All of a sudden you're like, what did I do so wrong that I was disqualified? Why me? The individualistic self, right, was birthed at that moment. Why me? What do I need to do in order to compensate for what I've been disqualified of? And thus we're reaching. All the while, the answer is right there. Select, choose the self. Choose the self, and you'll have experiences such as you, Heather, where once you choose yourself, that freedom, it just feels so good. How could you corrupt the freedom outside of you? How that's irrational at this point. Once you select and choose the self, I choose you. We're all walking gravitational forces. You know, our heart, which is a vortex, it's an example of a sudden spontaneous black hole technology, which means we're all part of being a music of the spheres. And why it's plural is because we're all black holes. And at the final moment of this experience, we must remember how to consume ourselves. If you're not selecting yourself, choosing yourself, you're waiting for someone else's black hole to consume you. It's not going to happen. It's impossible. You're going to be experiencing pathological timelines until the moment I choose myself. There's a fern. And, wow, we're really talking about ferns today, Heather. But there's another fern. I believe we brought up the fern of chaos before, but Pe'ahi fern, and she has such a beautiful transmission. She says, won't you recognize the great movement of the meaning, or will you devour the very center of humanity? My dream has always been to consume myself.
Mm, wow. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. Choose the self. Choose. We can create a book, Heather, you and I, right? And it's the book of how to reconcile Atlantis, the timeline of Atlantis. And in the book is one page, and it just says choose yourself, period.
And the other piece of it, I think, Keoni, is yes, we got caught in amnesia, but I think that part of those who remained were on a mission to plant the seed of remembrance. So part of the pain of amnesia is that inner emptiness, that awareness that something has been lost. But I think part of the key in this time, and you are such a wisdom keeper and a guide to us in that, is you hold that remembrance of the experience of Lemuria, the experience of love in a world that's lost the memory of that. And I think as we can reclaim that remembrance, then we find our way back home to the true self. And I love what you're saying about the center of the galaxy is in each one of us. Brian Swim, the cosmologist, says, from that standpoint of physics, we're in an expanding universe, and wherever you are, whoever you are, you're the center of the universe. It's everyone is a center.
Yes.
So we have to claim that and then know that everyone else is the center of the universe. And that's the omniverse that we can all participate in our uniqueness in such a celebration of joy and of love.
Yes, sister, that's so well said. I totally agree with you in that we all get to and we're allowed to know that we are the strongest gravitational force in our own lives. Wherever we are the center of this universe to which we're experiencing. This is not about competition. It's about also celebrating that other people and other things are also the centerpiece of their own gravitational force as well. I feel like that's a necessary protocol. And the technology of the music of the spheres is to allow that. And when I strum my instrument, my objective should not be to drown out someone else's instrument. That doesn't even make sense. It's about orchestration. And the more that we can choose ourselves, which means I'm not sentencing others to choose me, the more I have the freedom to express myself without having to be so over analytical about how I'm expressing myself because I'm worried I'm not going to be selected.
Well said. Or that fear, because at its core, too, it's the fear that I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable enough. But when we can really embrace that sense of love, then we know we're loved. We don't have to prove it. We can be it.
Mhm. Oh, yes. Yeah. And I feel like that begins to qualify us to then properly love others outside of this competition comparison paradigm to which, patriarchy is holding on for dear life with. But with this transition from Mu and then the trauma of loss into Atlantis and the explosion of infrastructure so that we could place love in things we value so that we can contain, possess it, we ultimately just get to come into recognition that the only dwelling that is essential is the dwelling of the self coming back into recognition of that. Because remember the Mu, their idea of structure was the relationship or the communion they had with others. That was considered a structure. One thing too with the explosion of the brilliance of the Atlantean timeline is, and this is, quite common, but when you are brilliant, sometimes you miss things that are common sense. I feel like that's what happened. We get so brilliant, right? Create, 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 engineer, engineer, engineer. All the while, that to which is so simple, we're missing it because we've been disconnected from that heart-centered common sense.
I mean, that's so well put, Keoni. And then it becomes also not only about a desire for control, but it circles back to some of what you said at the beginning, that mania of distraction. Because then if we're possessing enough, doing enough, acquiring enough, maybe we can override that sense of inner emptiness and
Right.
lack of love and
Right.
lack of self-love and true love in communion with others. So,
Oh, yeah.
do you think, Keoni, that part of our transition to move out of this pattern of amnesia and disconnection and control, do we need to go through a ceremony of honoring the ending of that?
Mm.
Omega.
I love that. So in yes, to answer your question. And but of course, what does that look like, right? But the ceremony that I've been facilitating about transfiguration, I invited all of us to repeat together. I complete the trauma of loss now.
Mm.
I complete the trauma of loss now. Now, Heather, it's one to say it, it's a whole different thing to actually believe it. And that is the ceremony, is to believe that the trauma of loss is complete. One of the ways to which we can empower ourselves to truly believe in that and experience that and follow through with that is the simple selection of the self. There are resources everywhere, and I'm so grateful for all the resources everywhere. I have not forgotten, however, that I am the primary resource, just like that gravitational force. And so functioning and selecting the self as the primary resource. What if all the questions you have, you already know the answers, right? It's insatiable, our need to acquisition. What if you already know everything you need to know right now, right? Do a Google search with the self. Right? Search engine, greatest search engine. Begin to extract, right? Participate with your alpha because this is the quantum physics of it, right? As I participate with my alpha, I'm shrinking all distances between my alpha and my omega to zero. Love the gravitational force of the self. So when you utter a phrase, a very bold phrase, such as, I complete the trauma of loss now, you also believe it. One of the things about transitioning into transhumanism that is quite unfortunate is it's so superficial. It's synthetic. A lot of people are behaving in that empty words, empty words, empty words. It's all trends, 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 fashion, fashion, fashion. We're not truly in the integrity of it. And that's the ceremony. The ceremony will be for each of us individually. When you say something like, I complete the trauma of loss now, how do you believe that?
That's a deep process because it can't be coming from the mind. It has to really resonate in your whole being. And to me, Keoni, this is some of where my own journey the last 30 years of working with the medicine wheel has been really helpful because you step into the medicine wheel, that sacred space, and you step out of the attachments and identifications with your personality self, with all those distractions and things around you. You do this journey of working your own healing of the blocks to come into consciousness, to come to the center. And I believe when you're in the center of that medicine wheel, even if it's not all integrated, you know you're in the energy of source, connected to the core of the earth, the center of the galaxy, and your heart. And it's only through our hearts that we can truly release that paradigm of separation and come into self-love and true love. And I think there is a way in which we have to remember that center. The medicine wheel is just reminding us, again, like we said earlier, that center is always in us. We've we've forgotten that it's always there. The love and the way back is always in us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we have to come back home to that center in ourselves, come back home to our hearts that opens the door to that remembrance.
Yeah, yeah, it's literally a coming home, right? It's literally a coming home. We've created so many distances from that heart-centeredness that you're speaking into of all the things we need to acquire in order to deserve to not be disqualified. What do I need to do to not be rejected? And we're creating all these distances to no end, right? Because the omega has been disqualified. And now we're in pathological timelines as well. When the alpha and the omega is really also the completion of all timelines. And I love the simplicity to which you just shared it as well, sister. And also for the audience, let's also just take a moment to also recognize that sometimes that which is most simple is not going to be stimulating to people who are so conditioned to be overstimulated.
Mm.
The very simple thing, choose the self, live in the heart, extract love from the heart. It's like, I need more though. Like, come on, come on. You make it more exciting kind of thing, right? Like we're so overstimulated that the most simple things are not sufficient. And so shrinking all non-essential distances to zero. Bring it home into your heart choose your heart. I would say that's first and foremost, choose your heart. I can engage. I love engaging in other people's hearts and gravitational forces, but it doesn't supersede my own. And that's not arrogance, right? Friends, when you choose yourself and when you say that you're the center of this universe, I don't think you're arrogant. I think that's basic truth. And for us to uh, reconcile competition and comparison will allow us to celebrate one another. When you, Heather, say you're the center of this universe, when that person says this, that doesn't threaten me because it's just basic truth. Basic truth somehow became underwhelming to this explosion of infrastructure where it's all about excess. Fold the non-essential. Fold the non-essential. When whatever that means to any of you listening, fold the non-essential. Whatever you can accomplish in your life to do that. For me, an example of folding the non-essential is being liked. Wow, it's really non-essential. You know what's greater than being liked? Being respected. Okay, how do I attain respect for within myself, right? That's what's most important. Truth. Truth. Then I become available for others to respect me if they so choose to. You don't have to. If you so choose to. I respect myself. I'm the gravitational force. That is Kamea Nui. That is the essential thing. And for you, I'm not required to validate you also. This superiority complex that we're kind of swimming in right now is creating two very destructive patterns for humanity. So the simplicity, let's begin to just select and choose that which is most simple. And sometimes we just got to sit in it, even when it's uncomfortable. Like, I want to jump, I want to dash here. It's like, can we just sit in it? Sit in the simplicity. You begin to feel your heart beat. You begin to feel, right, the resonance of your heart. That becomes interesting. Like, oh, what's that like? Right? Oh, this is fun. It's going to reveal so much, a wondrous world that will be captivating if that's what you need.
You know what's I think powerful too, and you live this, you model this, Keoni. To me, part of the challenge in being in this transition is that so much of our culture is completely out of balance and still caught in that paradigm of loss, disconnection, control, power over competition. But nature hasn't forgotten. You know, when I walk in the woods and when you commune with your fern allies, they haven't forgotten relationship. They haven't forgotten love. The more that I'm connecting to the planets and the stars, the more I realize, oh, this whole cosmos and the earth are all about love. We're the ones that have gotten caught in amnesia and disconnection, but we can find that love if even if we can't find it easily. And a lot of people in my community talk about, I can't find community. And I think so many in the world are out of alignment, out of balance, not coming from the heart. But then I think we can. And that was my healing journey in my own life, not my therapy. That didn't get me very far, actually, because I actually don't know how many therapists can actually sit in that energy of love. But I walked in nature and felt that love and nurturance and openness and freedom and authenticity all around me. And that helped me come back home to myself. So
That's so,
it's there for us, even when we can't find it easily in some of the people that surround us.
that's so true. And, in not being able to find community, for me, my experience was because I was so over aware or over hyper sensitive about having to adapt to a community instead of inviting a community to also adapt to me. Music of the spheres. And this was my own journey, having to remove myself of performance culture. If my goal is to be liked, if I'm craving a community, I have to be selected, right? Maybe that's why I didn't feel because I got to be selected. So now I have to perform in order to qualify, in order to be a part of a community. When as a gravitational force, remember, the world also gets to adapt to you, friends. We can adapt to you as well. The forest, the relationship I have with the forest. Oh yeah, Heather. Yeah, that for me too, right? That was my experience is the love was inspired by the communion with the forest and mainly because it holds a quality that I feel is becoming more and more rare in humanity, and that's aliveness.
Mm.
It feels alive. It's alive. It has the freedom of aliveness. Where in humanity, more and more we come into censorship culture, the misguided translation of unity consciousness where everyone must assimilate. It, our freedoms are being taken away. Our agency is being removed in order to adapt to that which will compensate for the trauma of loss. And just to simplify our conversation, Heather, it's a radical invitation for all human beings to come into this era or the age of the selecting or the choosing of the self. And what that will do as a consequence, I feel will bring us into the dawn of the completion of the human event. The scrutiny of love is accomplished. We have the authority. I have the authority to say I am a being who experiences love. I am the authority to say that. And my function, my actions is a testament of that. We follow through with that. The trauma of loss is complete.
Mhm.
I complete the trauma of loss now. I have the authority of the fluency of love. I'm going to say that again. I complete the trauma of loss now. I have the authority of the fluency of love.
I can feel that emanating from you. And before we close, Keoni, just I I I feel like another part of this is remembering the art of true listening. When I'm in my truth and in my own centered self, this is what I learned as a therapist, actually. I stopped trying to heal the other. I stopped trying to prove myself by being a good enough therapist. I dropped into this energy of the love that's all around us and just sat in that, held that, felt that in listening and being in relationship with the other. It created this energy field that healed us both. It was a lot about silence, about presence, about honoring the sacredness of the other and the sacredness of ourselves. And in that energetic, you feel the fullness of that, the richness of that, the emptiness goes away. And then it isn't even about what is the outcome of all of this. It's being in that energy of love in the present moment, which from what you said at the very beginning, Keoni, feels to me like that's a remnant of what the people of Mu knew. That experience of sacred communion with each other and all that is in the moment. And that is more than enough for all that is.
Oh, yes, Heather. That's so beautiful. Reconciling that sense of emptiness by simply fulfilling it. That is, I would say, the great trauma too of that transition of the vanishing of Mu and the beginning of Atlantis is that emptiness and this scramble to try and fill it with all these things rather than coming into one's own fullness and exuding that. You know, Heather, what I love, what you just shared too about sacredness is that one thing I do know about sacredness, at least my behavior with that which is sacred, is there's no way I can harm it. There's no way I can harm it. When I identify myself as sacred, there is no way I can harm it. When I identify other things and people as sacred, there's no way I can harm it. This is the antidote to war,
Mm,
war culture, is reestablishing mutual sacredness.
mm, mm, mm. So well said. Oh, dear Keoni, dear brother, any final words you'd like to leave with us? This has been so profound, and your wisdom and what you're bringing to us in understanding this journey we've been through, this journey of challenge to love, of initiation to come back to love is so profound. And maybe that's the interweaving of meaning with the return to love, is understanding that we can separate from it, but then we can come back to it with an even deeper appreciation of how profound that is.
Oh, yes, Heather. And I would say, and deeper relationship, but also with authority, because that is, I would say, the purpose of the challenge of love is we all must be challenged. We all must be challenged. This is an incredible initiation we're all experiencing. And that to which qualifies any initiation is to be challenged. And so our love is being challenged. But as the Alpha and the Omega, each and every one of us as individuals can decide when that's complete. We can decide. I can decide when it's complete. I complete the trauma of loss now. I have the authority of the fluency of love. Mahalo. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, dear brother, and blessings and love to all of you as we journey together back to love.